Thanks, yeah.
Hey everyone. Great to be back here after last year. Such a bigger event, so I'm really thankful for the CryptIst team for putting up this event. So my name is Utku. I am from Paribu Ventures. Paribu Ventures is the VC arm of Paribu, which is Turkey's largest central exchange. And we do investments in the blockchain space, early stage, and yeah, we did 20 deals in the last 2 years. Without further ado, I want to introduce you to Gökhan. So Gökhan, tell us more.
Hello everyone, welcome. This is Gökhan, I'm with IOSG Ventures. I've been in the space since 2017, investing and doing research into crypto. And IOSG Ventures has been investing in the space since 2017 as well. We got 3 offices at this point in Hong Kong, Shenzhen, and Singapore. We've been deploying a lot of capital into ZK space. We're proud investors in some of the L2s that you already know about, like Scroll, ZK Sync, Stackware, Aztec, and others. It's a pleasure to be here and looking forward to discuss more about ZK.
Great, let's jump into the questions. Such an impressive portfolio. You have to check IOSG website, really, like they've been investing all over the space. If you don't mind me asking, like how much capital did you deploy in the ZK space roughly in terms of the total capital?
Right, I think the first deployment we had in ZK space, it was back in 2018. It started with Mina actually. But then at this point, from our fund 2, we got around like 15-20% of our portfolio already deployed in ZK space. And we're raising for our fund 3, which I think is going to be still a significant portion of that is going to be deployed in the same space.
Well, okay, yeah, that makes you one of the biggest investors in the ZK technology space. So you're betting for the success of the technology, obviously. Can you maybe talk about like how you built the investment thesis and how do ZKs unlock? What do ZKs unlock so that like all these venture capital invest in the space?
Perfect. Yeah, I think like when VCs invest in the space, we're trying to find these like tectonic shifts where you got like a groundbreaking kind of development in the technology space that you expect is going to bring a lot of value to the space. So for ZK, we think ZK is one of these groundbreaking like shifts in the space. And there are, I think, 2 main value proposals coming out of ZK. The first one is privacy. Basically, if you're using zero-knowledge proof specifically for the purpose of providing privacy to people, I mean, you guys probably know that already, that blockchains don't provide any sort of privacy. Whatever you do on blockchain is very public. Whatever accounts and wallets you have, I can probably trace your accounts. I can go back and see what transactions you're making. And financial privacy, in a sense, I think one could argue is a kind of like a basic human right? This is something we have already in the space. So ZK brings privacy into crypto. And when we say privacy, I mean, in the past, it was associated with some of the illegal stuff. But then here we are talking about very basic privacy, where you're earning your salary in a private manner. You're making transactions and nobody knows about these transactions and payments, daily payments we're talking about. So this is one of the ways I think privacy comes into matter, and ZK helps with that. And within the privacy category, you're going to see a couple of different use cases. I think people already are exploring that, like on-chain credentials, for example. In the past, let's say you bought a certain NFT. Now there's a new game that only if you hold that NFT, you can participate in that game. You want to prove that you hold this NFT, but you don't want to reveal your wallet address or your past transactions or what price you bought this NFT at, right? So all these sorts of things, ZK can actually help provide these sorts of use cases. And there are obviously other use cases where you could have like government identity, like KYCs and everything. Using private ZK technology, you can prove that you're over 24 in terms of age. You earn like more than 10K per year so that you're eligible for a certain, let's say, mortgage loan, right? So these are all, I think, possible thanks to ZKP. And beyond that, there are other technologies in the space that are just developing, like fully homomorphic encryption, that are going to be providing privacy as well, but ZK is the most developed one that we have at this point. The second use case is probably the off-chain compute. Off-chain compute is So if you look at the blockchains at this point, what is the meter of cost for using Ethereum? It is the gas cost, right? And that requires you, basically, it meters how much gas, how much compute you have to consume in order to make that transaction. So ZKP technology helps you because it lets you do compute off-chain and verify it on-chain, right? Without any trusted assumptions, basically. That means when you have a compute-heavy application, we can talk about games, for example, right? If you want to run a game that requires a lot of compute per second. But then if you run this game on Ethereum, it's going to cost you a lot. So you don't want to do that. It's going to probably cost you like thousands of dollars even per second or something. So what you want to do is you want to have an off-chain agent that is doing this compute for you, but you want to make sure that this compute is done in integrity and verified it on-chain on Ethereum. So for these sort of use cases, and I think like L2s fall into that category, and beyond that, there is new narrative now that is becoming more popular, like co-processors. Basically, like these two things fall into that category, but I think we're going to talk more about that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I want to touch on the privacy a little bit further in the conversation. Before that, I want to talk about one of the use cases you mentioned is basically ZK technology is used in the rollup setup where the transactions are posted on the underlying consensus layer with their validity proofs, right? What type of problems does this solve when we think about the blockchain trilemma? So maybe can you touch on that?
Right. If you look at the trilemma, it goes through like decentralization, scalability, and security aspects. I think the most important aspect of L2s, as we know them, L2s give you a way to inherit Ethereum security. That is the 1 out of n assumptions, right? You just need one honest node that is doing these compute on the L2s that can verify it on L1. As long as you have that, you're inheriting the Ethereum security. So actually, in terms of security, L2s are well covered. But then what happens on L2 is, actually you're offloading the compute and a couple of other metrics of this L1 blockchain. So you're going to have in the future a lot of transactions, applications, users being onboarded to L2s, and all of these applications will consume compute, right? And what L2s enable you is basically you can actually batch these transactions, aggregate these transactions, and then execute them as well off-chain. And then you will only have to generate a proof and verify that proof on Ethereum itself. And verification is actually very cheap. If you want to do it on L1, we see that like the transaction cost per transaction on L2s is actually pretty low because verification doesn't actually cost that much. So in terms of scalability, L2s at this point, I think Alex from zkSync gave this number. Like once we have EIP 4844, you're going to probably have 15 to 20 L2s on top of Ethereum, which could potentially give you like 200, 250 TPS on the Ethereum network in general. If you look at Ethereum L1, we got only 15, depending on the day and time, maybe 10 to 20 TPS you're getting at most. So this already gives us some like 10 to 15x scalability on Ethereum network in general, right? And then on the decentralization part, it's a deeper question.
Yeah, it's a spectrum anyways.
Right.
I mean, it's not centralized, it's not decentralized right now, but there are a lot of technologies that are out there that are trying to make it decentralized. So maybe can you talk about the pain points on the centralization issues at the moment?
Right. I think the first question is maybe does a rollup have to be decentralized? Even if you can start from there, because as we mentioned, there's 1 out of n assumption, right? So if you're Coinbase and you're running the base chain, maybe you just want to have a control over what sort of a chain you have. You don't want it to be as permissionless, and you want to run some KYC matters, like measures in the future, right? So for certain use cases, for enterprises, right, you still want to settle on Ethereum, the global compute layer, but then you want to keep some privacy, some control over the L2 that you're building on. So in these cases, decentralization is not even a question, right? It doesn't have to be that way. But then if we're talking about what we're trying to build in the end is like a global compute layer that is fully permissionless. Anyone can come and build something on top of it. Anyone can come and make a transaction on top of it without any censorship. then this requires a certain decentralization. And on that matter, there are a couple of participants in these L2s. There are sequencers, there are proof generators. We have to talk about how do we decentralize each of these modules, right? And then in each of these matters, I think there are already a couple of teams, at least 5 of them, working, trying to solve each of them. Yeah,
I mean, we touched upon like why we are excited about the ZK technology and what your investment thesis is, and then we elaborated on the blockchain trilemma. And maybe now switching to like how you analyze the space as an investor, as an institutional investor. When we look at the frameworks of L1s, I mean, we can look at the TVL, we can look at the active wallets, or we can put some numbers on it to make our valuations to justify our valuations. What do you do there? Like, what do you do on the L2 space, or more specifically in the ZK space? Like, how do you come up with an analytical framework for these valuations?
Right. So for certain companies, I think when we're making the investment, we start with what sort of problems there are, and is this company or the companies that we're investing are trying to solve that. And as I mentioned, I think ZK has pretty good value proposals for the blockchain space in general. And we're trying to figure out what are some of the other bottlenecks that they have that the new company is trying to solve. For example, if you look at like a couple of our investments on the ZK EVM with Scroll, we did with ZK Sync. So it's basically ease of development, right? You have now this very scalable L2, but then if you want to build an application on that L2, how easy it is to come and deploy a project or a smart contract on top of it. We know that EVM already has some sort of a network power. It is difficult to argue that it is going to sustain it, but then at least this is the case for the last 7 years at least, right? So we believe that having an EVM network where developers using the Ethereum L1 developer tools can easily make applications. That was a kind of like a big need in the space. And everybody was thinking, like, this is a very tough job. Like, it's not going to be easy to come and build this in the matter of a couple of years. And voila, you have like Scroll, they already launched their mainnet. So we got a lot of these like super clever developers working on these tough problems. And then the investment in EVM side was an extension of, okay, EVM is like an interesting development environment, and we want it to be scalable. ZK EVMs are coming and solving this problem. Another one is, for example, like we invested in RiskZero recently, and RiskZero is building basically like a general purpose ZK VM where you can build applications, but in this time it's not for EVM, right? They're building the network in a way that you can use like C++, Rust, these sort of languages, and build scalable applications using zero-knowledge proof technology. So here you can see that, okay, we already have I think it's like 25K developers. And if you look at the full-time developers, it's something around 10K. But this is very few compared to large amount of traditional developers that you have. So if you want to bring them to build applications to our space, then you want to have some, like you want to bring the languages that they're accustomed to and enable them to build applications with those. So this was kind of like the thesis, high-level thesis behind the investment.
So I understand this is still a narrative-based investment style, but let's assume like going forward, like let's assume in 2-3 years time that we have these ZK networks that are like in production, like on mainnet, and like they have all these users and like activities. How are we going to look at these as a business? Like what are going to be the revenue drivers of these networks? And maybe if you can talk about the costs as well, like that, so that we can have a like better understanding of these businesses as businesses rather than just like as great technology advancements, you know?
Right. So if you look at the economic model of any ZK network, there are a couple of costs that they have to accrue. The first one is like which data availability layer that they're posting their transaction and like call data to. And this is basically the Ethereum data cost is pretty high, and it gives you a lot of costs for that, right? And then we have to check what sort of participants there are for each of these ZK network. As I mentioned, if these networks start operating in a fully optimized manner, then you're going to have sequencers that are ordering transactions on top of these. You're going to have proof generators that are basically, it's like data farms, right? They're going to have the GPUs, ASICs, and they're going to generate this proof. Because in the end, ZK rollups are compute networks and nothing else, if you think about it. So there will be a cost of compute, right? And then there will be stakers. We're going to go and stake our tokens on these networks, and there will be a time cost of money, right? They will have to give some sort of a yield based on the revenues that they're making. So I think if you add up these costs, each of this stack will have to charge some sort of premium, and then this is going to give you the final cost for the users. All of them are, if you add all of these up, they're all centralized now. That's why they're keeping the cost pretty low. But then in a decentralized manner, there's always a cost of decentralization. How do you do it in a decentralized way, but still keep the cost low? That's a hard thing to do. But the good news is, as I mentioned, on proof generation part, for example, we invested in Ingonyama. It's an Israeli-based team that are trying to optimize the proof generation based on GPU and FPGAs. So we expect them to bring proof generation costs at least 10x, potentially up to 100x, right? And optimize these networks. On the sequencer part, you got all these, I think Condu is building it, Espresso Networks is building it, Astria is building it. So you have multiple networks competing all together, which is gonna drive the cost down for the users in the end, right? So to answer your question, there are a couple of participants in these networks that all have cost. They will charge a premium on top. But then competition in any part of the tech stack is very intense in the crypto sector because in the end, the market is pretty big. So I think competition is gonna drive the prices very much down.
Yeah, I have so much more to ask, but I just have to be mindful of the time. So maybe in the last 3-4 minutes, we can maybe you touched on the bottlenecks or the challenges of the sector, in terms of the developers' ability to come in and build stuff without any friction. Maybe we can maybe talk more about those challenges if you have anything further to add. But at the end of the day, I want to leave with a positive note. So what makes you optimistic about I don't want to say it's not about optimistic, but what makes you think about the ZK space and make you excited?
Right. I think the first thing we have to remind ourselves is it was probably only 2017, 18, we first got the first ZK infrastructure company that raised money, right? I'm skipping the crypto ZK currencies Zcash and others. Mm-hmm. But then we have to remind ourselves this whole technology is very new. I know we're always very impatient and we want everything right now, but I think it really takes time. And considering, as I mentioned, for ZK EVM, right, people would give you 5 to 10 years time before the first network launch. And if you look at Scroll, I think it's been only 2 years they raised their seed round, right? So we're already moving fast ahead of the schedule, but we're still being impatient. I think it's going to take time. Probably you would give at least 3 to 5 years to see any of these ZK networks becoming optimized so that they can actually handle the mass adoption. But we are there, we're moving forward. There are, if you look at how much capital has been invested in ZK space, I would expect to be a couple of billions of dollars at this point. It's been 3 years since this space become hot. So each of these capital means there are a lot of developers trying to solve all these problems, right? So I think the capital is there, investor interest is there, very clever talent is mm-hmm. there. All of these are gonna make it in a way that we're gonna move much faster than people expect.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Gökhan, for everything that you shared with us. Maybe in the last minute or so, we can open up to questions if there are any. No questions, so
all right.
You were pretty clear.
Thank you.